So my name is Taz Daniels. I'm an instructional consultant here at CRLT, and it's my privilege to present to you our panel conversation on non-traditional experiences inside and outside of University of Michigan classrooms. This has been a fabulous collaboration over the last few months between the diversity team at CRLT, thinking about what are some kind of alternative style sessions that we can bring to you. And so an idea that we had was, instead of a traditional workshop where it's really about reflecting, which is a lot of what inclusive teaching at Michigan seminar series is about, we thought it would be nice to have an opportunity for you to be active listeners and really hear from some of the experts around campus who have a lot of experience working with students who we will call non-traditional or having non-traditional experiences. We'll be unpacking that quite a bit today. So before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that this session is being videotaped. However, your faces will not appear on the film, but we're going to have some alternative ways for you to ask questions just to make sure that we can all participate. So with that being said, I'm just going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. So as I mentioned, this is part of the Inclusive Teaching at Michigan series, which is taking place this week and the next couple of weeks to follow. So I encourage you to look at the list and continue attending these events. And letting us know what you think of them. One way to do that is by using the hashtag inclusive teaching. How many of you use Twitter? Okay. That's all right. No shame in that. I welcome you to tweet during the session. However, I just want to set some kind of groundwork for that, realizing that a lot of what we're going to be talking about today could be potentially sensitive. And so as you're tweeting out ideas or quotes, just think about how that might be taken in or out of context when you're attached to names. And so I just want you to be thoughtful about that. But I think we'll be okay there. The other thing that I want to add is that we are part of kind of this Inclusive Teaching at Michigan Passport series. So hopefully everybody had a chance to grab a book. Did everybody get a book? Okay. On the back, you can add a sticker saying that you came to the session. The stickers are actually over here in bright green, so we encourage you to do that as a way to show off all of the great inclusive teaching information that you have been gathering and all the conversations you've had. And I don't know, maybe you can even take a picture of the back of the book and tweet it at CRLT. I would love to see that. So those are just some of the initial housekeeping pieces that I wanted to cover. So I'm actually not going to do a ton of talking today, which I'm very excited about because I'm excited to be a listener along with everyone else. But I did want to just add a few goals for the session to give you an idea of where we're going to be going over the next 90 minutes. The first thing that we want to do is we want to explore what it means to be a non-traditional student with non-traditional experiences at the University of Michigan. So we're really going to be unpacking this term and exploring the different ways that people come at this. Number two is discussing how non-traditional experiences, both in and out of classroom settings, can impact student learning. A lot of times we kind of focus what's happening in our classes, but we know that the reality outside of the classes very much affects what happens when we are with our students inside. Number three, we want to think about developing strategies for instructors to support non-traditional students in their courses through both inclusive design as well as inclusive instruction. And so we're going to be hearing a lot of stories, narratives, as well as tangible strategies that you can employ in your classrooms to be as supportive as possible. And then finally, learning about the resources available on campus to support students with non-traditional backgrounds and experiences. CRLT is one of many units that thinks about this, and so this hopefully will be a unique opportunity to bring some of those voices together and really think critically about what we can do to improve experiences for students, no matter what their backgrounds are. So it's my pleasure to say that I'm not the only one up here today. We are joined by four of our panelists. Kirsten Elling, Harold Waters, Eric Fretz, and Matt Statement. Could you just raise your hands? Thank you very much. I just want to give you a little bit of background so that you maybe can start thinking about what types of questions you might have for them, and also just kind of thinking about how they might be able to kind of inform your understanding of non-traditional student experiences. Kirsten Elling received her PhD in clinical psychology from Loyola University in Chicago. She's been at the Center for the Education of Women at the University of Michigan for 11 years and is currently serving as the Associate Director for Counseling Programs and Services. In her role, Kirsten oversees CEW's career and educational counseling, as well as programming for students, faculty, staff, and community members. She also serves on a number of university committees and leads the Council for Non-Traditional Students at the University of Michigan. Harold Waters holds a dual PhD from LS&A in Psychology and English, and a teaching certification from the School of Education at the University of Michigan. He's currently the director of the Comprehensive Studies Program, which houses the Bridge Scholars Programs, designed to support high school students' transition to the University of Michigan. Harold was himself a Bridge kid, and can speak to the impact of such programs on student wellness and success. We also have Eric Fretz, who first arrived at the University of Michigan as an undergraduate in 1985 as a Navy ROTC scholarship. After graduation, he went into active and reserve duty in the Navy for 20 years until retirement. And while in the reserves, he returned to the University of Michigan to pursue a dual PhD in the combined program in education and psychology. During his program, Eric was deployed twice to Operation Iraqi Freedom and was a member of the Student Veteran Association. He's now a lecturer in the Department of Psychology, School of Education, and College of Engineering, and serves as a faculty advisor for the Student Veterans Association. Finally, we have Matt Statman, who's worked in addiction treatment and recovery support since 2004. In 2009, during his time as a graduate student in the School of Social Work here, Matt became a founding member of the student organization, Students for Recovery. In 2012, he went on to become the program manager for the Collegiate Recovery Program, where he provides support services for University of Michigan students. Matt is also an adjunct faculty member at Eastern Michigan University in the School of Social Work. So you can tell why I'm really excited that we have all of these fantastic voices, experiences, knowledge banks here to talk to us today. So how are we going to leverage this? Here's our session plan. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to invite Kristen to come up and give kind of a brief overview about what we mean by non-traditional student experiences at the University of Michigan. So she'll be sharing some research that she's done with her colleagues here. We'll then have about 5 minutes or so for each of the panelists to kind of introduce themselves, also the work that they do at their respective centers. And then we'll transition into a panel conversation. We'll invite all 4 panelists to come up and talk about some questions that we identified would be relevant kind of across the board. And then finally, at the end, we'll be transitioning to questions from the audience. And so the way that we thought about doing this, one is, the traditional Q&A, raise your hand if you have a question. We also wanted to offer an opportunity for some anonymous question asking, especially if you're thinking about things throughout the presentation, you might jot them down. So you'll notice that on your seats you have a couple of index cards. So I would invite you to, as you're listening to the presentations, write down any questions that you have. And if you do have questions that you'd like me to post to the panel, if you could just pass them towards the ends and I'll come and collect them. And even if we can't get through all of them, we'll try our best to get those questions answered, and either through a blog post or a follow-up, hopefully we'll be able to get through all of them. All right, any questions? Yes?
Maybe you already said this. Will this be available, the PowerPoint be available?
I'm not sure, but we can talk about that. Yeah, thank you. All right. So with that, I will hand it over to Kristen.
Take the clicker too. Thank you. So I also, just before I get started, I want to say thanks to Taz and to CRLT for inviting myself and everyone to participate. And Taz has just been really amazing about getting it all organized, and we had a meeting just last week, but to kind of put our heads together and get thinking about the questions. So I just really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your thoroughness. So yeah, should be good. All right, so I'm mostly going to focus on some U of M data, but as far as this big question, what do we mean by non-traditional students? It's really interesting because I view it as an evolving term, and not a real ideal term, but it's sort of what we have right now. So we actually did a session in March with CRLT and CW, and I spent a little more time talking about kind of national definitions and then U of M definitions, and I'm going to dive mostly into the U of M stuff right now, but it's worth noting that if you look at national definitions, I mean, things that are typically included are, being an older student, like 25 or older, being a veteran, being a caregiver of some sort, attending, part-time, like those are some definitions that you'll see. And then the other thing that you'll see if you look at national data, depends on which website you go to or which, research institution, but you'll see some things like, 34% of undergrads delay, their college education by a year or more. 27% have dependents. 43% attend part-time. Does that sound like the U of M? No. So something that actually might be quite normative or usual in the national context. If you then talk about the U of M and what most students, you know, sort of the demographics and the life situations of most undergrad students, especially here, it's very different. So something like 97% of students here, I think, attend full-time, for example. So only 3%, you know, are part-time attendees. If you look for the number of students who are caregivers here on this campus, we don't even collect that data. That's something that we are working on trying to collect, but no one even knows for sure. So that's how non-traditional that, you know, identity marker is on the U of M campus. So with that context, because it's also partly why CEW did a study a couple of years ago. So we've always served non-traditional students. Our focus has been women and non-traditional students for a long time, and I should just say right now, so CEW, we're actually in the middle of a rebranding process. We often get the question, do you serve men? We do serve men. We've always served men. If you look at the students that we serve, about 20% are men, but we've been concerned about what are some non-traditional, you know, male or transgender students that don't feel like they can come to CEW because of that, you know, the word women in there, and it's kind of that binary gender definition, and it's not talking about men at all. So we're in a rebranding process. Stay tuned for how that turns out. But anyway, so a couple of years ago we said, you know, we want to make sure we've got a lot of knowledge from our one-on-one counseling and our programs and all the work that we do with non-traditional students, but let's do a research, let's do a study. So we recruited students through a lot of our partners from across campus, the Ann Arbor campus, for a focus group study. And so we had about 80 students participate and 20 staff and faculty. The focus groups took place over a period of a month or so. We had 9 focus groups that were just for students and 3 that were for faculty and staff. And so the data that I'm going to talk about, it's a glimpse and sort of a deeper dive into the non-traditional students that were in our study and some of the things that we found from that study. So one of the things that we did too, like prior to the focus groups, the participants filled out just a checkbox of a long list of markers of non-traditional identity status. And then in addition to checking off which ones they felt applied to them, we also gave them the opportunity to add any other categories that maybe weren't on the list, because we know it's also an emerging thing that every, you know, I think about undocumented students. Like, I don't remember talking about them 15 years ago, but we're talking about them now. So things like that, you know, just change and evolve over time. So from that the pre-focus group piece of things, we found out, let's see, I should be getting ahead of myself to the next slide. But this is a list, and I know it's in kind of tiny print, but it lists all of the markers that either that we listed and also ones that were added by our participants, with the top 6 being older student, person of color, commuter, first gen, caregiver, closely followed by disabled, transfer student, low SES, LGBTQ, and you can see it kind of goes down the list. But those were all of the markers that were identified, and then the frequencies of how many students identified with that particular marker. And then what I wanted to highlight is getting into some of the themes of what we found is that if we looked at, so this number of students who identify and then how many markers they indicated. So you could check as many as apply. And so there were only 6 students, which is about 8% of our study, who only checked 1 marker. So 92% of the students in our study indicated multiple markers, 2 or more. The median was actually, as you can see, 4. So there were 20 students who indicated there were 4 markers. So I think to us that was really a very powerful finding. It also really resonated with the students that we have worked with over the years, that there's usually multiple things going on, that someone might be older and have caregiver responsibilities, and they're coming from a low SES background, and so then they look for housing not in Ann Arbor because they can't afford it, so now they're a commuter student. So that often there's these multiple layers, and then how that impacts their experience at the U of M. It's very complex and it's very multi-layered, and it can make it difficult for those students to find other students that they feel like are in the same boat or they think would understand their situation. So let's see, make sure I said everything I wanted to say about the other thing I could say about the study is that we ended up with about 22 hours of tape from those focus group sessions, and one thing that I can share is that the students, they were supposed to be hour-and-a-half sessions, and we had pizza and that kind of thing. So we routinely had to cut the sessions off because they were running over. These students who showed up were so eager to talk, and they had a lot to say, and they really, again and again, feedback that we got was they were just so happy to be in a room with other students who were sharing their experiences, 5 minutes, okay, of being, othered in multiple ways, and how hard it was to find other people that resonated with their experiences. So that was also just a really powerful kind of qualitative finding, is that there was a lot to say, and then it was hard to get people to, to wrap up. And also it was interesting, some nice connections were formed in those focus groups. So anyway, just to kind of recap a few themes, and I know we're going to be talking about all of this more. But so the intersectionality that I mentioned, that was a real theme that we saw. The other theme, and I touched on this a little bit, but that non-traditional, the students in our studies really did look at sort of the traditional U of M student, and then they kind of found themselves defining it as wow, most of the students, they're 18, they're relatively affluent, they're Christian, they're straight, they're, whatever it was, but they would sort of talk about that and say, and I'm different in all these ways. So there was a real sense of they were very aware of what the normative student was and how they were different, and they really felt that in a number of ways. And I don't have time for a lot of quotes, but we'll get into that later. Non-traditional includes both graduate and undergraduate students. That's another thing that people sometimes think, when you get to grad school, you're not non-traditional anymore because you already have a degree. But we had grad students, in our groups too, who talked about just that was even another experience to try and navigate, and they often were first gen and didn't maybe have a sense of that, or they had already felt, othered in their undergrad experience, and now they felt the same way in graduate school, or they had a hard time plugging in with their cohort because maybe their cohort, they were the only one with children, or they were the only one who was in their 40s versus everyone else who was in their 30s. And then also the STEM fields, we found that was sort of a sub-theme that came up, that some of these issues, I guess just to be succinct about it, they were exacerbated in a lot of the STEM fields, that students of color talked about, yeah, I already felt like I was a minority on this campus, and then in my chemistry department, I am the only, person of color, things like that. So things were just magnified. And then some of the scheduling issues, which we can talk about, I know we'll talk about as we discuss things, but, lab groups or study groups or all of that, all of that just seemed to become a little bit even more difficult with the STEM fields. The other theme that I wanted to just highlight too, that was really interesting to me, was the staff and faculty groups. Some of the discussion there, they actually, staff and faculty in the discussions did not see being a student of color as a non-traditional marker, but the students very much saw that as a non-traditional marker. And so to me that was just a really, just very powerful finding, and I think explains a lot about discussions that we're having all over campus about the student experience and all that. So I think I'm out of time here, but so with the non-traditional students in Ann Arbor, this is just sort of a, with the Ann Arbor campus, kind of a top, 10 list or so of non-traditional students. And the other thing I did was a couple of these is I just bullet pointed, so I was looking at data from the Office of Budget and Planning. The majority of undergrad U of M students have a family income of over 150,000. So being below SES, it's really something that's very much felt by those students. It's very visible to them how affluent a lot of the students are and how they are not. And maybe they're even coming from a community where to them, their whole community was that way, or they didn't feel so othered by it, and now they come to the U of M campus and it's really apparent that there's a different world that they're coming from. And then the other point that I highlighted about the part-time and full-time enrollment, that yeah, most U of M students full-time, they may be working a little bit, but someone who has a full-time job and is enrolled part-time, very non-traditional. So I'll stop there. I know we're going to get into all of this as we go along. I think that's my last slide. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.
Sure.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Taz said, I'm Harold Waters, and I'm the director of the Comprehensive Studies program. And when I was asked to present, I was happy to do it because there are a lot of really interesting populations of students who reside within the Comprehensive Studies program that will hit a lot of those markers. I think one group that is not up here that I think is important to think about when you think about non-traditional are our student athletes who on this campus oftentimes are left out of the conversation, but in many instances they are also considered a non-traditional group because of how they come into the university and the barriers that impact their ability to navigate the university, because someone's always defining for them what their job is. But in the Comprehensive Studies program, we work with students across all of those identities that were just pointed out. Many of our student populations are first generation. More than 60% of our student populations are first generation. The university uses first generation and lower SES as two proxies for looking at diversity across the entire university. And so a lot of first generation students, a lot of lower SES students who come from backgrounds that are not traditional, meaning they are the 4.0 in their school, but their school had no AP courses. But those students are here at the University of Michigan. So how does that student experience look? It's very difficult for the student, right? Because if my person sitting next to me in my chemistry class had 34 credits in AP and I didn't have any opportunity, what does that mean? So the purpose of my office, the job that I have to do is make sure that we are kind of mitigating that. Looking at what's the experience of the individual student. Because we have a program that has 2,700 students in it. And 2,700 students who all came into the university differently than what would be considered a traditional track. So how do you make sure that all of these students are being serviced in a way that is intentional? And so we are a really interesting program in that we kind of intersect very nicely between academic affairs and student affairs. Because I have faculty, I have teachers who are working very closely with this population of students to make sure that those needs, particularly in those gateway courses like chemistry 130 and math 105 and 115, that these students are getting their needs met at the same time as following the trajectory that has been identified for that course in order for them to be successful. So not only do they have to learn this new way of education, they have to do it at a record speed. And so I have faculty who are very versed in helping students navigate, because they take the exact same exams as any other student on this campus. So the expectation is they should know what every student knows, but the reality of it is there's some gaps there. And so we are designed, and our purpose for having these gateway courses is to kind of deal with those things. And then we also, on the student affairs side, when it comes to programming, looking at time management for students, looking at different measures of academic success. Because what we do know about our student population is that if they leave the University of Michigan, rarely is it for academic reasons. It's typically the non-cognitive issues that impact them, like being the only one in the classroom, or faculty who have good intentions but don't actually know how to communicate with this group without putting them in an isolated event. And so our faculty are very good at even working with other faculty in terms of how do I make sure that this student's voice is heard without putting them on the spotlight. And that's a very difficult thing to do because our students often feel it. And they don't feel it in the CSP classroom because that's the most diverse classroom you're going to see on campus. So I'm not the only one. So it's good. I did want to share with you all a little bit of what our demographics is. So this is our mission, established in 1983, and these are the things that we really focus in on. The principles of diversity, access, equity, and inclusion, and then we promote academic success, very important personal growth and wellness, because many people ignore the wellness issues when it comes to non-traditional students in the community. And this is kind of a snapshot of what our student population looks like. So our largest population of students are white students who are first gen lower SES, which is a shift that has happened since 2006 with Prop 2. And so as you can see, our largest population is at 37% all the way down. So we have 27, 31. And so because we're so diverse and because there is no one definition for non-traditional, all of our program is around the entire holistic view of any individual student who has some kind of identifier that admissions looked at to say this student would benefit from a program that's community-based. And so that's kind of what CSP is and how we operate in this landscape.
Thank you very much, Harold.
Yeah.
Timer on here, make sure you can time correctly. Does this have a little laser in it or anything?
I don't know what it has.
Just checking. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So use this for quick. Yes, so I'm Eric Fretz. As I mentioned, I'm the Student Veteran Association. I also wanted to just emphasize I do a lot of things with veterans here. I've got a region appointment to the Military Officer Education Program Committee that's run out of the Provost Office, who supervises all the ROTC units and all the military things. And then PAVE is the program for peer advisors for veteran education. That's run out of MSPAN. It's a fantastic program here run out of psychiatry. We're a scholar program. We bring vets onto campus in the summer and do summer education, sort of a boot camp to kind of convince them. We're recruiting now to WCC and bringing in additional Michigan students. It's really wonderful. Veterans Treatment Court, I run their mentorship program, so vets that get in trouble, student or not, go to this court, and then I recruit student vets and other vets in the local area to be mentors to run in parallel with them while they go through this sort of restorative, more treatment-based justice model there. And then I'm also the chairman for VCAT 9, which is a state initiative that organizes the surrounding 6 counties, about 50,000 veterans, and I'm the chairman for that. So it's really cool. Access to a lot of veteran services, and I get to see a lot of veterans and their struggles. So it definitely sort of informs my vision here, right? So things that I want to cover for student veterans and misconceptions, just in general. There's about 300 of them on campus here, about 150 graduate and 150 undergrad. That varies up and down. There is one main student veterans association that kind of supports and groups them together. About 50 of those students are sort of members in some way of that system. 50 of the undergrads. So all the undergrads tend to go to the SVA. In the graduate communities, both Ross and the Ross Business School and the Law School have their own self-organized communities. Those are shorter times here, obviously, and they're very different. Those are almost always officers. And so in the military, there's a real distinction between officer and enlisted. It's almost as stark as professor and student, not quite that bad, but you can imagine, the students don't all come to the executive committee meetings, right? So there's this distance. And so these groups do kind of their own thing, and the SVA, they're welcome to join that. And historically, we have maybe 1 or 2 a year that actually join us. And then who are they? My big message for you here is that when you have veterans in your classroom, you're probably not going to know unless they tell you. I mean, every once in a while there's going to be someone who makes it obvious. So when I show you these pictures of these 4 wonderful Michigan students, and I ask you, for example, which one of the 4 or did all of them serve? Pick out the veterans. It's an interesting question. I don't know, maybe, right? Which one is still serving actively? Is actually a reservist now and on the weekends, and while the group projects are going on, is actually subject to recall? Right? Which one is a Marine, right? Actually, this one, right? Which one never left the United States, right? Which ones were deployed, right? All these guys were deployed, right? Which ones have different sort of mental health struggles, right? Which one barely made it out of U of M and actually got fired from his first job and is still struggling despite everything we tried to do, right? So they're all very different, and they don't identify, right? You're not gonna know. Some are out and some are not, in the sense out meaning that they want their veteranness acknowledged. And some of them really are trying to hide it. It seems odd, right? But we have vets that will come in and literally be trying to hide it. They describe it as sort of, I come out of the military, I put everything in the box, I put it in the back of my head, and I want to come here and I just want to pass as a regular student. I don't want my veteran thing. Not only do I want it to be salient, I don't even want it to be known, because I'm worried about sort of, well, either I want to put it behind me or I'm worried about judgments and things like that. So we'll talk about a few of those things. So one of the things to take away is that in general, once you find out that someone is a veteran, a thing that you can do explicitly is say, are you comfortable with me discussing this in class before you actually do that? Because there's a chance you'll really burn somebody on that. Most of them really do feel old, poor, misunderstood, and alone. Of these 3, really, it's just these that really matters, but they do feel very much older, and yet you won't really tell the difference. I mean, I had one time a 26-year-old sort of stomping his feet. This professor doesn't give me enough respect. I'm sorry. I'm like, dude, you're 25,
yeah.
And they're surrounded by people who are 20. You look exactly the same. Let it go. But they feel it. They feel old. They also definitely on the GI Bill, so they're getting a very small stipend. They certainly don't meet some of this monetary standards we heard about earlier. And they have a big problem with not being affiliated. It's one of the biggest things. If you do talk to a veteran and you are having those conversations, and ask them, what other veterans are you talking to? Are you aware that we have a military veteran service program here? We have an SVA. You have Dr. Fretz. You have all these resources that can sort of give you this community that you've lost, because losing that is actually one of the biggest problems they have. They can't put their finger on it. They just feel lost, and they're not part of their group anymore, and they don't have purpose. It's really a struggle for them. Post-traumatic stress versus post-traumatic growth, basically they don't all have a problem. Most of them are actually very high functioning. So they have a problem not believing they should be here. That's that imposter syndrome that we see in pretty much every student here and there, right? They really have a problem with help seeking. Human beings in general have a problem with this. Military beats into them that seeking help is for the weak. And so they're twice, or an order of magnitude worse in terms of help seeking than a regular student. And they overlap with a lot of other groups here. So transferred, married, kids, older, community, students of color, first generation. They map intersection across all of those. So a lot of matches here. In terms of strengths and solutions, so the new numbers are growing. We have a small number compared to many. University of Michigan is doing a lot to recruit vets, but the biggest thing when we go out to recruit for Warrior Scholar we get for most veterans is Michigan's too good. I can't compete in Michigan, right? It's like asking just any given college athlete, definitely you're going to the NFL, and oh my gosh, the Super Bowl champion team, I could never play, right? And we get that very commonly, even for students who are clearly demonstrating those skills. But we get really good institutional support. Over here, this Office of Veterans and Military Services, Phil Larson, that's PN Larson at UMich. He's a great guy, supervises all the sort of the official U of M stuff, and then I'm more the sort of the faculty advisor to the SBA. Between the two of us, we're really a nice dynamic duo. The strengths and solutions, one of the things I want to encourage you to think about is that veterans are generally quite mature and quite clear about what they're doing. So they really can be great for leading groups in your classes, and they generally have a rich store of sort of very adaptive behaviors. They're very concerned about time, they're very disciplined, they're very, very focused, or if you can give them a clear sort of mission, they've really been inculcated with this get it done, loyalty, team, everything. On the flip side, it flips on them because they get frustrated with groups. So when they're paired with a bunch of 19-year-olds who think they're showing up at 8:30 or at 8 o'clock, they have enough trouble with Michigan time. Because if it's 0800, they're there at 0755, because 5 minutes early is late. And so even just the 8:10 thing is hard, right? And then of course there's the little microaggressions that you'll sometimes see. Every one of my student vets says at some point, oh, you were in the military? Oh, you're not gonna kill me, are you? Or did you kill anyone? Or these endless sort of things that are really casually done, but are really very thoughtless. And most of them don't actually go nuts about it, but it wears on them, right? They're on the GI Bill, so again, there's a dollar disparity there. Something you guys could do with an explicit statement of support, could be in class, could be in syllabus, just say, I consider myself a veteran-friendly member of this university. If you are a veteran or served in the military in any way, you're free to contact me, share that with me. I'm interested in talking with you. If you have any issues, let me know, and I can help refer you to these resources. You should assume resiliency rather than a deficit model. The biggest problem when we do surveys, they say, you show average 100 Americans a picture of a homeless person on the street. What is the strongest, other than saying they're homeless, what's the next strongest association? Not drugs, anything else, veteran status, which really kind of bums us out, because that's just really not true. So assume this resiliency, and then encourage their affiliation, because so many, if they're not doing things with other vets, that's where there's a whole host of problems that are associated with that. Almost everybody that's in trouble in the treatment court is not affiliated. And the biggest thing about the treatment court is we build a family around them, and at least 50% of them suddenly start to thrive like a plant that finally gets sunshine, right? So it's really cool. And then here's just the resources we have on U of M here. This is the Office of Military Services. We have the Student Vets Association, which includes a whole bunch of things. We do orientation, we do PAVE, does a bunch of classes. So I do veteran success classes every other week. So every single week these guys have a meeting. They're either meeting with me and Phil, they have a meeting with themselves, or have a class with me about veteran success, finances, study skills, all these things. Then we do a summer leadership track, I take them out of the wilderness, all that. And then a couple other things, CAP, CEW, we have a great VA here, very highly rated Veterans Administration and healthcare facility. This is a good one, 1-800-MICHVET, just to file away. This is a hotline set up by the state of Michigan and staffed all day. And any veteran can call there with any question, missing records, needs help with this issue, that, and they will route you to wherever you need to go. And then this is my email. So if you ever have a vet who's in trouble, I'm just kind of the sheepdog. I'll chase them wherever they go. So get in trouble, you can always send them to me and I'll figure it out. Awesome. Any questions? Or not questions come later. So, all right.
Thank you so much, Eric.
And I'm ready to go. So I'm a vet person.
That's okay. Great information. Thank you so much.
I will go longer. Hi, I'm Matt Statman. I manage the Collegiate Recovery Program here at the University of Michigan. So I will start by just telling a brief story. I graduated from the School of Social Work here, and I was a non-traditional student in many ways. I got into recovery from a substance use disorder when I was 32 years old in 2002, and after getting into recovery, started to really sort of think about what I wanted to do with my life, because I had never done that earlier on in my life, and decided getting an education was part of what I wanted to do. So I went to Eastern and got an undergraduate degree in social work, and then came over here to the School of Social Work and got a graduate degree. Meanwhile, I was working at a treatment center. I was very active in the local recovering community. I had a lot of friends who were in recovery. I was proud about being in recovery. It was something that was very central to my identity and important to me. And I came over here to the School of Social Work, and I had talked to a lot of people in recovery about sort of do you disclose and when do you disclose and what happens if you don't disclose and all this stuff. And first week or two of classes, I was down in the basement of the School of Social Work, which was a library at the time. And I saw someone I knew in recovery across the library, and she was in her second semester and was starting the student organization called Students for Recovery. And she approached me, and pretty loudly, at least I thought it was pretty loud, she said, "Hey Matt, I'm starting the student org, Students for Recovery, and you should be part of it." And I felt like the blood drained from my face. I'm looking around to see who can hear. I'm sweating. And I realized in hindsight, like, I shouldn't have to sort of feel that way about something that is so important to me and something that's actually sort of a strength in my life and not a deficit. And so the Students for Recovery organization kind of grew and branched out, and the university was formally adopted a collegiate recovery program in 2012, which is when I got hired. We are part of this national collegiate recovery movement. So what universities are realizing is that there is this hidden population of students who is on college campuses who deserve support, and we do we do spend a lot of time and effort sort of addressing substance use in various ways on college campuses, from prevention to harm reduction to referrals to treatment, but we've traditionally done a pretty bad job of supporting students who go off to treatment and then are returning to campus, or who are in recovery and deciding to come to the university like I was. And so these collegiate recovery programs are something that we kind of got in on the front end of this movement, but they're becoming more and more widespread and are incredibly important. We are not a treatment. We don't do counseling or treatment. We're a recovery support, and we try to do it. The main part of my job is sort of community organizing. We're trying to create a community, maintain a community where students can support each other on campus, and so a lot of our students have already done treatment. Some of our students are still involved with treatment, but I'm not doing treatment on campus. I do a lot of case management kind of stuff with them. We have students who hit every one of those markers. We had our students range in age this last semester from 18 to 58. I think there were 16 different majors in there. We have many transfer students, some traditional students, but not that many. And some of the other universities that have these programs have a lot more traditional students than we do, but a lot of people who got into recovery after high school tore up their academics so badly that they need to do some work in order to be able to get into a school like this. We support abstinence-based recovery in an abstinence-hostile environment. So the culture on college campuses is one that is hostile to the lifestyle that these students need to live in order to stay, in some cases, in order to stay alive. I mean, if that's what it comes down to, but in order to certainly thrive. When we do identity work with our students, they all identify as people in recovery. That's an important piece of their identity, and it's one that's hidden and stigmatized in a lot of cases. There's a lot of fear about coming out in certain instances, and many of our students have extensive legal history. So about half of our students have been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, which makes sort of disclosing more important than for some of the other ones but on the flip side of that, if you don't have to disclose, then some of the social pressure can actually even be worse. And they are subjected to all kinds of different small and big microaggressions throughout the course of their daily existence here on campus. One of the most common ones I hear is, you can't be an alcoholic, you're still in school. We have had students in recovery sitting in classrooms where, I've had several of our students are in recovery from heroin addiction, and sitting in classrooms where people make jokes about that, or where the professor will say something like, you know, heroin addicts don't get into recovery, that kind of thing. And then just all the, you know, all the networking and socializing that happens around alcohol can force them to make choices. And one of the things that we like to say is you shouldn't have to choose between your recovery and your education, but in a lot of cases it might feel to them like they have to do that. So I will talk more when we move forward.
Thank you so much, Matt.
So I'm going to say a little bit about CW now. CW, soon to be rebranded. So we are, I put our mission on the left over there. We were called out as a foundational center in the DE&I, U of M master plan. So very proud to always be, trying to be a bridge from the community to the U of M, really promoting educational access and success for women and non-traditional students. We provide, I'll just go over and talk a little bit about some of the key resources. And actually I want to pause and just point out that we have, I know I brought, and I think almost everyone else on the panel brought materials. So after the session, there's lots of this information. I know that I'm presenting is over there, and other folks too. So the career and educational counseling, it's one-on-one counseling that we provide. People often ask, how is that different from U of M career services? We actually refer back and forth to career services quite a bit. But one of the things that we found is that for some of the non-traditional students, while the services at the Kerr Center can be helpful, they're just, by nature more geared towards that traditional student who's had a more typical trajectory of like, yep, I went to high school and then I went to college and now I'm going to the next thing. And so if there's a student who, did other things, is older, had another career, had some gap in their education for whatever reason, it could be a choice, it could be something that wasn't a choice because of medical issues or family issues or all kinds of things. So how do you explain that gap in your resume, or if you're applying to the next step in your education, how do you explain that you're not on that traditional trajectory? And so when it comes to that kind of things, I think CW has a particular expertise that can be really helpful for students who are non-traditional in many ways. We also offer the other thing I would say is that work-life balance is something that's a real area of expertise. So again, the student who also has caregiving responsibilities, is also managing, working a full-time job, those kinds of things, it might be helpful for them to come in and talk with a CW counselor about how do you do that, and also conduct a job search, and also be applying to schools, that kind of thing. So we have some good resources there. We have emergency grants. We call them critical difference grants. And those are open to graduate students and non-traditional undergrads. And so what it is it's not for something like tuition, sort of a chronic, ongoing, expected expense, but it's for things that come up that are unexpected, that really threaten to derail a student's semester. And if we can help them with that financial issue, it really helps them stay on track, have a successful semester. So a couple examples, so we get a lot of requests from the School of Social Work because they have to do internships, and often those internships are in Detroit, for example, and they're driving these old rickety cars and the car breaks down and they don't have money in their budget to repair their car, especially if they're not from a well-resourced background, and they've got tons of loans already. Well, they can't finish their degree if they don't get that car repaired and go and complete their internship. And so that would be an example. We also help people out with childcare expenses. There is a childcare subsidy, but it's often not enough to really cover the childcare expenses that you need to finish your dissertation or just go to class or what have you. So CW can often fill in the gaps there. We do work through OFA, so there's lots of stuff around packaging and someone has to have unmet need, and I won't go into all of that, but we do it in cooperation with OFA. We have research grants also, and I know there's faculty in the room, so I want to let people know about that, but there's, for undergrads, if there's faculty who are working on a project, there's a grant process, it's all on our website, but faculty can apply for funds to pay students to work on the research team. And for graduate students, and this is all if there's a gender aspect to the research, for graduate students they can apply for money to fund their own research. And then we also have scholarships, and the scholarships that we have, it's like 45 years or so that we've been doing scholarships. We're now, I think this year we're awarding about $500,000 in scholarships, and they are scholarships for non-traditional students. And so the way non-traditional is defined for the scholarship, there were different legal considerations than just this broader definition of non-traditional, but for undergrads, it's someone who's had an interruption of 2 years or more in their education, or they're a primary caregiver, either of children or elder care of that. So that's for undergrad. For graduate student, they need to have an interruption in their education of 5 years or more, because it's more traditional that grad students might have somewhat of an interruption, or be a primary caregiver. So we are actually right in the middle of our scholarship cycle. We've selected our scholars, and they'll be awarded funds. So that's something where we know that financial boost can be so helpful. The other thing that we found is that scholars tell us again and again, like the money was great, but the vote of confidence to get that CW scholarship was just this like extra. They needed it. They needed to hear like, you're a scholar, you belong here, you know, we're honoring you. So that's been one of the most meaningful things over the years for our scholars. And then programs we offer, you know, partnering with people around campus, programs that are specifically targeted at non-traditional students, helping build community, helping navigate the system. And I have 1 minute left. And so the last thing that I will say is just a little bit about, so the student data, I don't have such detailed data for who comes to our programs, but for people who come in for our counseling, we have very detailed demographic data. And so to me, it's always interesting to look at how the students that come in for counseling at CW, how they compare to the broader youth and undergrad demographics. And so I've collapsed ethnicity into one category, underrepresented minority there. But so if our participants, we see almost 62% of who we see are fall into underrepresented minority category compared to 12.3% of U of M undergrads. Almost 48% of who we see are first-gen students compared to 12% in the U of M population. And then parents are 17% of who we see, and as I said before, we don't even know in terms of what that percentage is on campus. So that's just a little slice, and I know we'll get to talk about this more. So that's it for the slides.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karen.